All right, so today we're diving deep into the life and ideas of, well, Giordano Bruno, a 16th century figure.
Quite a figure.
Yeah, a 16th century figure whose, well, you could say whose courage and its commitment to the truth, they still resonate today, you know?
Oh, they absolutely do.
Bruno was a Dominican monk.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
A Dominican monk.
Turned
An
philosopher
astronomer.
and fierce advocate for scientific reasoning. All this in a time when those sorts of views were
Dangerous.
not exactly embraced, you know what I mean?
Yeah, to say the least.
To say the least. In fact, his ideas ultimately led to his execution by the Roman Inquisition.
Talk about commitment to your beliefs, right?
Oh, yeah,
You can't get much
that's
more
right.
committed than that.
You can't get much more committed than that.
No.
So we've got a captivating story on our hands and a cautionary tale, too.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to understand Bruno's groundbreaking cosmology, his impact, and explore why his struggles are still relevant in our time in this age of information overload and, well, frankly, the resurgence of unscientific thinking, which is something, you know, we see all around us.
That seems like every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
So it all begins, this story, it begins with Copernicus.
Of course.
Bruno was an early and very passionate supporter of the heliocentric theory.
Which, for those who may have forgotten, is the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Right, not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Which, was a huge deal back then because the established view at the time, the view that was sanctioned by the church, rooted in the works of Ptolemy and Thomas Aquinas, was that the Earth was the center of the universe.
The geocentric view.
Yes.
And, I mean, I kind of get why people thought that way back then, you know.
And of course.
From our perspective here on Earth, it really does feel like everything revolves around us.
Absolutely. It's intuitive, right? I mean, that model, that geocentric model, was the accepted model for over 1,400 years. What's really interesting, though, is how Copernicus's book, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, was initially received.
Was it because it challenged such deeply held beliefs? It's going up against, what, like 1,000 years of dogma?
Precisely.
Yeah.
But initially was actually tolerated. And the reason for that is that it was dedicated to the Pope. And it had a preface suggesting that the heliocentric model was just speculation, just a hypothetical mathematical model.
So Copernicus is saying, hey, this is just, a thought experiment.
Yeah, just playing with ideas here.
Yeah.
And you see, the Ptolemaic system, the geocentric one, well, it was becoming more and more complex, as astronomers trying to reconcile it with what they were actually observing.
Right, they're looking up at the sky and they're like,
This isn't quite...
things aren't adding up here.
Adding up.
Yeah.
And Copernicus was offering a much simpler model, a more elegant model, but of course a hugely controversial one.
But Bruno, he wasn't buying this just speculation business, was he?
Oh, Bruno. No.
He was all in.
He was completely convinced that Copernicus was presenting fact, not fiction. He wasn't mincing words about his feelings either. He called the preface the work of asses, written for the benefit of other equally ignorant asses.
He didn't hold back, did he?
No, Bruno was not known for his subtlety.
No, not at all. So we've got Copernicus sort of dipping his toe into the heliocentric pool, and Bruno comes along and does a cannonball right into the deep end.
He jumps right in.
So what happens next? What happens after Bruno makes this big splash?
Well, Bruno, he takes Copernicus's idea and runs with it, further than I think Copernicus ever imagined. He goes from the sun-centered system to envisioning an infinite universe teeming with countless worlds just like ours.
Hold on, infinite. As in no end.
Exactly, no end.
Oh, wow.
This was completely radical, completely different from that view of a finite cosmos, with Earth at the center. I mean, imagine the impact of this idea, challenging the very foundation of how humanity understood its place in the universe.
Yeah, it's like, hey, guess what, everybody? We're not the center of it all.
Exactly. Not so special after all.
Not so special.
Yeah.
So what led him to this idea, this infinite universe idea? Was it just like scientific observation? Or was there something more, like a philosophical or even a theological reason behind it?
It was a combination of all of those, actually. For Bruno, the idea of an infinite universe, it just made sense. It was consistent with how he understood the natural world, but it was also, he thought, more fitting for a divine creator. He argued that a God capable of creating one world could certainly create an infinite number of them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a reflection of God's power.
Right. If you believe in an all-powerful God, why would creation be limited?
Exactly. In fact, Bruno saw believing in a finite universe as almost an insult to God, limiting God's power. There's this quote from him where he says, and I love this quote, It has seemed to me unworthy of the divine goodness and power to create a finite world when able to produce beside it another and others without end, so that I have declared that there are endless particular worlds similar to this earth.
He really was a thinker, wasn't he? Like a theologian, almost as much as he was an astronomer.
Absolutely. Theology, philosophy, it's all connected for him.
Right, and this infinite universe, it wasn't just some abstract concept for him, was it?
No, not at all. Bruno believed all those countless worlds were inhabited, just like ours, full of life and intelligence. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? How far ahead of his time he was. We're only just now starting to really search for life on other planets.
Yeah, it's incredible to think what he would say about our current scientific understanding of the universe. I mean, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, when he's proposing this infinite universe full of other worlds, isn't he also sort of taking aim at this whole idea of human exceptionalism?
Mhm.
The idea that we're the center of God's creation. That was pretty central to the church's teaching back then, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely central.
Yeah,
Yeah, Bruno was basically saying, hey, we're not so special after all.
right. One planet among countless others. And I can't help but think that, that probably didn't sit well with the church either.
Oh, no, not at all. That's a great point. Because it gets to the heart of why Bruno was so threatening to the church. He was challenging not just their scientific understanding, right, but their entire worldview, their philosophical and theological foundations. It was an attack on their authority.
It's almost like he's saying, hey, your whole system is built on a shaky foundation.
Exactly, a direct attack on their power.
So you've got Copernicus carefully wording his book, dedicating it to the Pope, adding that preface. And Bruno is out there calling people asses and basically saying the universe is infinite. Deal with it.
That's Bruno in a nutshell.
No wonder he ended up, well, on the wrong side of the Inquisition.
He was walking a dangerous path, that's for sure.
A very dangerous path.
And it wasn't just the infinite universe thing either that got him in trouble.
Oh, right. There was a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
A lot more that Bruno had to say that was, shall we say, controversial.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
What about those, what were they called, animistic atoms? The ones with, like, a mini-god inside them? I have to admit, that's one. Of the things about Bruno that I still kind of struggle to grasp.
It's a pretty mind-blowing concept, isn't it? Bruno called them monads, and they were like the fundamental building blocks of his universe.
So everything is made of these monads.
Everything. Every single piece of matter, from a grain of sand to the stars, all made up of monads. And here's the really wild part. Each monad, it contained a miniature image of God.
Okay, I think I need a little more on this. Are we talking about God literally, physically being inside every atom? Or is this more symbolic, like a metaphor?
It's a bit of both, actually. Bruno is pulling from these ancient Hermetic traditions, where they saw the universe as this living, breathing entity, infused with the divine spirit. For him, God wasn't this distant figure, sitting up in heaven, but an active force present in every part of creation. And these monads, they were how that divine presence manifested itself in the material world.
So it's not like every atom has a tiny little God with a beard, sitting inside it.
No, not like that.
More like the idea that the divine is what woven into the fabric of existence.
Exactly, that's it. And this whole idea of monads, it really challenged that prevailing Aristotelian view, the one where matter was seen as this passive and inert thing.
Aristotle thought matter was just, well, stuff. Stuff that
Yeah.
needs something external to give it shape and purpose, right?
That's right. He thought it needed a form to make it useful.
So, like, clay needs a potter to mold it into something.
Perfect analogy. But Bruno, he said no, matter wasn't passive, it was alive, it was dynamic, and it contained all the potential for form and change within itself. It's like, think of it this way. Every atom was like a seed that had the blueprint for a whole tree inside it.
So instead of needing some outside force to shape it, it had the power to shape itself.
Yeah.
From within.
Exactly. And this idea of matter being alive, infused with the divine, it had huge implications for how he saw the universe. Remember we talked about that division between Earth and the heavens?
Yeah, that was a big deal back then.
Huge. Well, Bruno thought that was totally artificial. For him, the Earth and the heavens, they were part of the same unified nature, both made of these divine monads, all connected.
So no separation between the earthly realm and the celestial realm. Everything interconnected, everything infused with the divine. It's kind of a beautiful idea when you think about it.
It is.
But I can see how that would have been super heretical back in Bruno's day. I mean, he's turning the whole Christian worldview on its head.
He absolutely was. And it wasn't just his ideas about the universe that were causing problems. Bruno also had some pretty radical views on religion itself.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, he rejected the divinity of Jesus, for one, and the Immaculate Conception. He saw Jesus as a great moral teacher, but not as a divine being.
I can only imagine how that went over with the church.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he wasn't just trying to be provocative or anything.
No, no.
He actually believed this stuff.
He absolutely did. He was deeply committed to truth, to finding it no matter the cost.
He was willing to question everything, even the things that everyone else thought were sacred.
And he didn't shy away from expressing his views either, even when he knew it could put him in danger.
Which it did. Remember that satirical work he wrote, The Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast? The one where he calls out the church for being corrupt?
Yes, I mean, not exactly subtle.
Not subtle at all. Talk about poking the bear.
It's a wonder he lasted as long as he did.
He must have known he was walking a very dangerous path.
He did. He spent years traveling all over Europe, trying to find places where he could speak and write more freely.
Did she find any?
He found some. Temporary refuge, even in some Protestant countries. But even there, he faced opposition. His ideas, they were just too radical for most people to handle.
So he's on the run, constantly looking over his shoulder, but never willing to back down from what he believes.
That's Bruno.
And then there's that fateful return to Italy.
Oh, yes.
What on earth made him go back there? Right back into the lion's den.
It was a classic case of misplaced trust. Bruno, he got lured back to Italy by this Venetian nobleman, Giovanni Mocenigo. Mocenigo had promised Bruno patronage and protection, said he was really interested in Bruno's ideas.
So Bruno, ever the optimist, he thinks he's finally found this safe haven, right? Where he can finally share his ideas without fear.
That's what he thought. But unfortunately, it wasn't the case. Mocenigo turned out to be, well, less than trustworthy. He actually ended up reporting Bruno to the Venetian Inquisition, accused him of heresy.
Wait, so the guy who was supposed to be protecting him turned him in? That's just awful. What was Mocenigo's angle? Was he scared? Or was there something more going on there?
It's hard to say for sure, really. Some people think Mocenigo was genuinely disturbed by Bruno's ideas, that he felt he had a religious duty to report him. Others think maybe he had some personal reasons, or even political reasons. Maybe Bruno knew too much. Whatever the reason, it ended badly for Bruno. He was arrested in 1592 and thrown in prison by the Inquisition.
And that's where he'd spend the next 7 years of his life facing trial for his beliefs.
7 years? Can you imagine?
I can't even imagine what that must have been like. The mental and emotional strength to endure that.
It's incredible. The Inquisition, they demanded that he recant his views, admit that he was wrong, denounce his own ideas.
And Bruno said?
He refused. He stayed defiant, even when he was facing unimaginable pressure.
Wow, that's almost like he was willing to die for what he believed.
He was. And that's exactly what happened. On February 17th, 1600, Giordano Bruno was taken to the Campo dei Fiori in Rome and burned alive at the stake.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
To be silenced like that, just for speaking your mind, daring to question things. I mean, it makes you think, what impact did his death actually have on his ideas? Did it silence him for good? Or did it actually give his words more power? Yeah, it's a tragic ending. Tragic end to a really extraordinary life.
It is.
But it makes you think, did they actually succeed in silencing him?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Did they actually silence him, or did his death, did it give his ideas even more power?
It's like a paradox, almost.
Yeah, a bit of a paradox.
The church tries to erase him.
But they might have actually ensured that his ideas lived on.
Right, by making them forbidden.
Exactly. They burned his books, put them on that list of forbidden books, the Index of Forbidden Books.
They really tried to make sure that nobody would ever read his work.
They wanted to wipe his ideas off the face of the earth.
But it often happens with censorship.
It backfires.
It backfires. People become more curious.
Get fruit, right.
It's like, yeah, you're not allowed to read this. Well, now I really want to read it.
Exactly. People started smuggling his works, copying them, sharing them in secret.
They were spreading his ideas underground.
Sharing them with scholars, intellectuals, anyone who was intrigued by what Bruno had to say.
So Bruno's ideas, they were like those monads.
Ah, yes. The monads.
They contained the seeds of their own survival.
They did. And you can see Bruno's influence in the work of thinkers who came after him. Thinkers who weren't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Give me an example.
Take William Gilbert, for instance, an English physician, a natural philosopher, I guess you could say, one of the pioneers of studying magnetism.
Oh, yeah, William Gilbert. Didn't he write that book, what was it called? Demigine? Something like that.
De Magnete, yes. And in that book, he picks up on Bruno's ideas about the Earth being a giant magnet. He proposes that the Earth has its own magnetic field, which is why compasses always point north.
Makes sense. It's kind of obvious now, but back then it was a pretty revolutionary idea.
Revolutionary, exactly. And it really helped lay the groundwork for our modern understanding of geomagnetism.
So Bruno wasn't just some, armchair philosopher.
No,
He was influencing real science.
absolutely. And his ideas also found their way into the work of another Englishman, Thomas Harriot, an astronomer and mathematician.
Thomas Harriot, all right.
Yeah.
I'm not so familiar with him.
He was a contemporary of Bruno, and like Bruno, he was fascinated by the idea of an infinite universe.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time observing the moons of Jupiter.
I bet he would have loved to see the images from the James Webb Space Telescope.
Oh, I know, right? He would have been blown away.
So these guys, Gilbert and Harriet, they were carrying the torch, so to speak,
Yeah.
carrying on Bruno's legacy.
Yes, a legacy of observation, of questioning, of not being afraid to think differently.
They helped lay the foundation for the scientific revolution that would transform Europe.
They did. And it all goes back to Bruno. Bruno might have been silenced in the most brutal way imaginable, but his ideas, they continued to spread.
It's a real testament to the power of ideas, isn't it? Like, you can try to burn them, to erase them from history, to ban them.
But if those ideas have truth in them,
They find a way.
you'll find a way.
They find a way to survive, to flourish, to change the world.
That's the thing about truth. It has a way of coming out, eventually. And that brings us to, I think, a very important question. Why does Bruno's story still matter? Centuries later, why should we care about this guy?
It's a good question. I think for me, it's because, well, the challenges Bruno faced, they're still relevant today.
They are, in a lot of ways.
We're talking about a fight for truth against dogma, against the suppression of science. Those battles are still being fought today, in different forms.
We might not have the Inquisition anymore, but there are forces out there that would love to control what we think, what we believe.
Control information.
Exactly. Think about the rise of misinformation online, the conspiracy theories, all the attempts to discredit scientific evidence. On things like climate change, for example.
And let's not forget the manipulation of information, the propaganda, the spin. It's everywhere these days.
It is. It's like history is repeating itself.
We have more access to information than ever before.
We do.
But it's also easier than ever to get lost in that sea of information.
To drown in it, almost.
Yeah, and I think that's why Bruno's story resonates so strongly today.
He reminds us to be vigilant, to think critically, to question authority.
Not to take things at face value, even if they come from sources we trust.
We have to be willing to think for ourselves. Examine the evidence, draw our own conclusions, be skeptical, be curious, be, in a sense, more like Bruno.
He was a rebel, a free thinker, and in the end, he was a martyr for truth.
He was. And in a world where truth is so often under attack, his story, well, it's a call to action.
A call to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's unpopular, even when it's dangerous.
Because truth matters. Truth sets us free.
It allows us to grow, to evolve, to build a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bruno's story, it might have ended tragically, but it's a story that continues to inspire. And it's a story that we need now more than
More
ever.
than ever.